Welcome to our psychological moderators of stress. We just finished our discussion of pain and the human stress model, among other things. Now, psychological moderators of stress. One is self-efficacy explanation or expectation. Can I do this? Am I capable? Do I believe that I can handle this stressor? And that's hugely important. If stressors are coming at you, but you say, hey, I got this. It's very similar to what I've done before. I know I can do this. I'm the little engine that could. Remember, I know I can. Then we're probably going to be better off, right? Psychological hardiness. To what extent are you willing to accept stress as part of your life, right? Oh, Penelope, please don't do that. Okay? Coping, and to what extent are you effective in your coping mechanisms, right? And to what extent do you understand them? We'll talk about coping mechanisms. Come on, sweetie. You want to come up? Come on. Say hello to everybody. All right. Academic burnout, right? To what extent might you become burned out towards the end of the semester? I know many of us do, right? A lot of us lecturers are becoming burned out entering into the semester this semester, but it's a special semester, you know. And I think many of us hold hope that not every semester is going to be like this. So if I can get through it this time, the future will be better, right? To what extent do we have any notion of predictability? And that's hugely important. Unpredictability equals anxiety for most people, and the loss of control also equals anxiety, frustration, and a host of negative emotions like sadness, and at its extreme, probably despair, right? Optimism, hey, it's going to be better. So the glass half full people, and notice that's probably about 40-50% genetically determined. Glass half full people do have a leg up on the stress response. To what extent do you have social support? So let's talk self-efficacy, right? Mahatma Gandhi, if I have the belief I can do it, I shall surely acquire the capacity to do it, even if I may not have it at the beginning. So this is a confidence in oneself, and often we say, boy, I didn't think I could do it. I didn't know that I was going to be successful, but I stuck to it, and I did it, right? And you learn that about yourself, and you can apply that to new situations, right? So beliefs to the effect that one can perform a task successfully or manage a stressor. I can do this, right? I got it. People with high self-efficacy, less likely to be disturbed by adverse events, more likely to lose weight and quit smoking if that's their challenge, right? Whatever your challenge might be. People are more likely to comply with medical advice when they think it will work, so they believe that they can pull it off. If you're told, hey, exercise will help, if you can believe you exercise, then you're more likely to engage in that behavior. Right. So, and notice, going back to transactional analysis, how do you sell to your patient? How do you generate the self-efficacy in that person? How do you create the belief that they can perform the treatment? And this should be a critical aspect of treatment paradigms, right? Is how are you going to make the patient believe that they can do this? Now, Martin Seligman is going to figure pretty big in our course off and on. It's hard not to. His contribution to positive psychology is really can't even be quantified, right? And he will go down, I think, as one of the 20th century's most important psychologists when people reflect back. Maybe he will be tremendously important, right? So he coined the term learned helplessness, and he did research to demonstrate this. And this is a pattern where we learn not to respond to a negative stimulus, right? Because we've learned that our responses don't change it. So we become helpless. And this is a horrible space to be. He did his research with animals, which I hate. But imagine someone who's in an abusive relationship and their partner continually either verbally or physically abuses them. And no matter how they change their behavior, the abuse seems to continue. At a certain point, you go, what the hell? What's the use in this? No matter what I do, it makes no difference. And people just learn at that point, may learn to accept the abuse. They've entered into a state of learned helplessness, right? Now, resilience is kind of the flip side of this. This is this capacity to adapt, to achieve well-being, and cope with stress in spite of serious threats to a person's development or their existence, right? And so kind of two sides to the coin. And part of, maybe our mission in this course is to help people understand how they can increase their resilience, right, over time. Now, psychological hardiness is another term for resilience, and I want to introduce you to Dr. Susan Kobasa, right, and Salvatore Madi. He'll come on the next slide. According to Kobasa and Madi, a cluster of traits that buffer stress and are characterized by commitment, control, and challenge. And Kobasa and Madi developed what they called hardiness training, largely based on the world on the work of Viktor Frankl and his observations in Auschwitz, right? Frankl was a German Jew psychologist, right? And he's swept up and he's taken to Auschwitz, and the amount of stress that people were put under in Auschwitz is inconceivable. And you could die at any moment, you could be raped at any moment, you could be tortured at any moment. There's no way to predict if it will happen and when it will happen. So all the components of setting up the most stressful situation possible are present. And a lot of people just collapsed under the pressure. They just broke down. It destroyed them psychologically. But Frankl noticed that certain people seem to be able to continue to find beauty, right? And for those of you reading Man's Search for Meaning, you'll get the story firsthand. Great book for this course, right? We see that Frankl said some people seem to be able to adapt to the horrors of Auschwitz. They seem, and he coined the term resilient, they seem to be resilient. They are put in the most ungodly situation, and yet they're able to maintain their relationship with their God through this resilience. So Kobasa and Madi, studied this idea, and they developed their own term called cognitive hardiness, right? And here's Madi. Cognitive hardiness is through deepening the attitudes of commitment, control, and challenge, which they call the 3 C's, person can simultaneously develop, reach their potentialities, and cope effectively with stress, right? So it's this commitment to take control over your response to your environment, the way you perceive your environment, right? And now obstacles become challenges, right? Problems become challenges for you to overcome. So it's really this shifting of perspective, and they developed a hardiness training. I actually went through the hardiness training as a health psychology course when I was at UCI, where Dr. Madi still teaches. And I had an affinity for Dr. Madi. He wasn't necessarily the warmest professor ever, but he taught personality psychology as well, which just blew my mind. It was a fantastic course, and I took the hardiness course with Madi, and I was just fascinated. And it really kind of brought me back in touch with existential psychology, existential philosophy, which we'll talk about later on in the course and throughout the course. But in essence, it's these 3 C's, and it's committing to establishing control and reinterpreting stressors as challenges to overcome, and exerting control in a way that one can to do so. So they still offer hardiness training at UCI. They teach it to organizations, especially in California, Southern California. And students just report wonderful things in their ability to get through school participating in hardiness training. So predictability and control are part of what's being manipulated here. The ability to predict a stressor moderates its impact. Predictability allows us to brace for the inevitable and plan ways for coping with it. Right? So one thing I have in my toolkit: what happens if we're still at home next semester, and how am I going to cope with that? Right? It is possible. And that makes that it's possible, but I acknowledge the possibility. It makes it more predictable. It allows me to start controlling elements of my ability to adapt to that, right? So that will give me more control over how it affects me, right? So control allows us to feel that we're not at the mercy of fate, that, hey, this is a probability, and the self-efficacy now feeds in, but I should be able to deal with this. It might not be pleasant, it might not be pretty, but I think we can get through it. So predictability is a greater benefit to people who wish to exercise control over the situation. So those of us who are control freaks, and raise your hand if that applies to you, right? Predictability then, or at least entertaining multiple probabilities, right, allows you to exert greater control and should make you feel better about the world. Okay. Now, let's talk about two styles of coping, because that's usually, maybe the approach to stress. There's defensive coping, which is withdrawal, denial, procrastination, maybe substance abuse. I'm just going to numb myself to the pain, right? And or aggression, that is lashing out. And those might then be defensive coping. Active coping is engaging in the problem, the act of problem solving and positive action. So let's talk about coping for college students, right? 5 tips for college students to avoid burnout. This be for you guys specifically, because I know the tremendous pressures you're under. I was there not too long. Well, it's been about 20 years now, but regardless, I have sympathy and empathy. Burnout's a stress-related state of exhaustion, right? It leads to feelings of isolation, and especially under COVID and kind of this enforced isolation, low accomplishment, and even depression, right? So although research has long shown that burnout affects employees, we now know burnout affects students. And one of my major challenges during this COVID crisis and porting all this to an online is attempting to avoid burnout, right? But let's go back to talking about you guys. So start with why. Intrinsic motivation. Why the hell are you in school, right? It is associated with lower academic burnout and higher academic achievement. The most effective way of preventing burnout is to be sure you know why you're in college to begin with. And revisit it again and again and again. Why am I here? What am I trying to do? Build your internal motivation by identifying this. Now, for some of you, you might not have a life choice yet in terms of career or whatever, but let's face it, if nothing else, earning a bachelor's degree is consistent with earning more money, greater life satisfaction, and greater perspective taking. So even if you don't know exactly what this degree is for, those are results of earning that degree. So you can always fall back on that when you say, why am I doing this? I don't even know what I want to do. Well, you're earning a degree, and that's an accomplishment, and kudos to you for even attempting it, right? Look at number 2. Visualize your work in progress. Use the syllabus, other resources to get a picture of the projects you have and their deadlines. Use to-do lists, calendars, apps to remind you of the work. How many of you have ever put something on a to-do list after you finished it, but put it on the to-do list so you could check it off? And do that. Give yourself the moment-to-moment credit for accomplishing. Take that big project, slice it into, and that's what the syllabus does, is say, this is the course. But the course comprises these assignments. And whittle away at it, a little bit at a time. Watch yourself make progress and take the beneficial psychological consequences of that process, right? Work a little every day. High-impact learning requires investment of time and effort, and what we've learned about memory is don't try to pack it all in at one time, little bit at a time, and lock it to things you already know, right? So, the majority of incoming college students, what does it say? Spend less than 10 hours per week studying in high school, need to learn to put a more sustained effort, but break it up into smaller chunks. Study for each class a little bit every day, to the extent that that's possible for you, right? So take advantage of learning strategies that have been demonstrated empirically to enhance learning. Just reading passively at the last minute in a cram session is largely going to be unproductive. But active reading, a little bit every day, will do a lot. And if you can, I would suggest for all of us to try and take a day off. And I'm going to try and take Sundays off this semester. I don't know how much that's going to work out, but we all have to avoid burnout, right? So, number 4, take breaks regularly. Since burnout's related to stress, manage stress carefully. Notice that what does the stress response do? It activates us, right? To run or to fight. So think about it. When feeling stressed, exercise is about the ideal outlet because the body's already set up to participate in it, right? That's part of the stress response, right? So, and take some time to engage in some creative pursuits, whatever that might be for you, right? Take some time to connect with your loved ones, right? And if you can't do it physically, then do it virtually, right? So, ease the stress of your college studies. And number 5, keep the end in mind. Parts of college are simply stressful and difficult. I thought factor analysis was going to kill me. but it's one course for one quarter, and we were on the quarter system then, and you get through it, and then you do something else. The next quarter will look differently, and if you're an optimist like me, you say the next quarter will be better, right? Additionally, knowledge and skills you gain while in college have lasting and wide-ranging benefits. We can't even predict. You can't even know how much what you learn in college will benefit you in the future. And you never know necessarily under what circumstances. Crazy shit's going to pop into your mind 10 years from now, and you go, wow, yeah, I dig. I understand what was being said then, and now I'm good to go on it, right? You're going to have to trust me on that because it's impossible for you to necessarily know that. Another coping dichotomy, psychological coping strategies, okay? Emotion focused versus problem focused coping. And I think these are huge points, right? If you can do something about the problem, then use problem focused coping. If you have control, if you have power, then affect the problem. But if you don't have the power over the problem, then you better learn to use emotion focused coping. And that's where you cope by reorienting your emotions. So you can do problem-focused work or you can do emotion-focused work. Become capable with both and use them as it makes sense, right? And this is huge. When I was at UCI, I did research with John Rice, graduate student there, in Dr. Levine's lab. And what we were doing was assessing children's ability to choose between emotion-focused and problem-focused coping. And we found that children as young as 7 or 8 could successfully, when presented with scenarios, choose either emotion-focused or problem-focused coping as appropriate to the scenario. And I thought that was pretty awesome. And also I wondered then, why do adults seem to have a problem with that when children seem to have pretty good facility for it? And maybe we get too smart for our own good, at least some adults do. So understand the difference, and this reminds me of Reinhold Niebuhr's The Alcoholics Anonymous prayer, right? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And to me this is simply, hey, let me know when I need to do the emotion-focused coping thing, let me know when it's an opportunity for me to do the problem-focused thing, and God, I hope that I can tell the difference between those two situations. Pretty basic, and I think totally profound, right? So, psychological resources then for coping with stress. Optimistic style of thinking, we already know what that is, the glass half full, right? So there you go, let's do the cliche. The power of humor and distraction in finding difficult situations, that sometimes humor can give us a break, could be worse. And it hasn't killed me yet, right? And those are stupid statements, but often they have the ability to make us feel better. So, now understanding the evidence on attitudes and health, appreciating the needs for reducing your stress, I think is hugely important. And that is, I'm not necessarily going to allow myself to be stressed when I have an opportunity to have control over that. That I'm going to make choices that are consistent with reducing my overall stress. That is, I might have to turn down certain invitations. I might have to not accept certain responsibilities. I might have to limit my participation in clubs. Well, whatever it is, but make choices with the consideration of your overall stress picture. Okay? So what we want is not blind optimism. That's not going to work, right? And this is according to Seligman, but flexible optimism. Optimism with eyes wide open. So, I ask the question in class all the time, hey, raise your hand if you're a pessimist, raise your hand if you're an optimist, and then usually someone will say, yeah, but I consider myself more of a realist. And this is knowing when to use optimism when it's appropriate to do so, right? We must be able to use pessimism, keen sense of reality when we need it, but without having to dwell in its dark shadows, according to Seligman. And I think that's good advice, right? Think about these guys. That's a stray cat in our neighborhood, had her 2 kittens, and I got to kind of watch them grow up, and then they go on their separate ways. But they got plenty of stressors to deal with. But they know how to take a moment in the grass on a day of nice weather and enjoy themselves as well. So we gotta learn how to do this, right? So psychological techniques for coping with stress then, cognitive restructuring, cognitive behavioral therapy. When we look at Dr. Aaron Beck and his contribution to fighting depression, that is, we reappraise stressors as less uncertain and more within one's control. So this is really just changing our perspective, changing the way we look at things, i.e., simple title, cognitive restructuring. A couple others I'll offer you. Downward social comparisons. You can just find someone whose situation sucks worse than yours does, right? And there's an old parable. I was complaining about having no shoes until I met a man who had no feet. And when we think about those that are worse off, sometimes it makes us feel better about our own situation. So we're social beings. We should engage in attempting to offer social support to ourselves and others. Right? Research has found that introverts, people who lack social skills, people who live alone, seem more prone to developing infections and diseases when they're stressed. Right? And major areas of social support are emotional concern, instrumental aid, getting appropriate information, and part of our critical thinking is understanding what's good information and what is not helpful information. Using the appraisal process wisely and being, being kind of like metacognitive about how we use an appraisal process, and socializing. So we're going to go to the next part here.